They say blood is thicker than water. But sometimes, the deepest cuts come not from a stranger's sword, but from the gilded knife held by the one you taught how to hold a spoon. For Eleanor Vance, this old saying was merely a distant proverb, a piece of abstract wisdom that had no place in her world. Her world consisted of one person, her daughter, Clara, a world she had built brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, ever since her husband Richard's life was cut tragically short 15 years ago. The engagement party at the Montgomery estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was something out of a magazine. Crystal flutes chimed, a string quartet played softly in the manicured gardens, and the low murmur of polite society filled the air. Eleanor stood near a marble fountain, a solitary figure in a simple navy dress, her heart swelling with a pride so immense it almost hurt. This was Clara's moment. Her daughter, her brilliant, beautiful daughter, was marrying into one of the most respected families on the East Coast. Every hardship Eleanor had endured, every double shift she had worked, every lonely night she had spent worrying, it all felt validated in this one perfect evening. She watched Clara moving through the crowd, radiant in white, her fiancé Leo Montgomery at her side, the very picture of happiness. Finally, Clara's eyes met hers, and she beckoned her mother over. Eleanor smiled, her steps light as she navigated the clusters of elegant guests. But as she drew near, the smile on Clara's face didn't quite reach her eyes. She leaned in, her voice a perfectly manicured whisper that smelled of champagne and something chillingly unfamiliar. "Mom, can we talk over here for a moment?" Clara led her to a secluded alcove, hidden from view by a cascade of white roses. The music of the quartet seemed to fade away. Clara's expression shifted, the socialite's mask dissolving into a sheet of cold, hard resolve. She didn't fidget, she didn't look away. She looked directly at her mother, the woman who had given her everything. "Mom, I need to be clear," Clara began, her tone as sterile as a surgeon's scalpel. "This is a new chapter for me, a new life, and for the sake of my new family, and for my future, you're not invited to my wedding." The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, hanging in the fragrant air between the roses. Eleanor felt a strange buzzing in her ears, the world tilting slightly on its axis. She searched her daughter's face for a sign, a flicker of a joke, a cruel misunderstanding. She found nothing. Just the unwavering gaze of a stranger. The ground beneath her feet seemed to dissolve, leaving her in a freefall of shock and disbelief. Before she could find a single word, a single breath to protest, Clara turned and melted back into the party, leaving Eleanor alone with the wreckage of her world. Just as her knees felt weak enough to buckle, a calm, commanding voice spoke from behind her, cutting through the haze of her pain. "Mrs. Vance? I'm Isabel Montgomery, Leo's mother. I overheard. I believe you, and I need to talk." To understand a betrayal of this magnitude, one must first understand the depth of the love it was built upon. Before she was the ghost at a party, Eleanor Vance was the sun in a small, three-person universe. Her husband, Richard, was a man who thought in schematics and dreamed in algorithms. He wasn't a savvy businessman. He was a pure inventor, a brilliant electrical engineer whose mind operated on a plane few could comprehend. His garage wasn't for cars. It was a sanctuary of soldering irons, tangled wires, and chalkboards filled with equations that looked like a secret language. He spoke of changing the world, not with bravado, but with the quiet certainty of a man who could see the future in the heart of a lithium-ion cell. He was the brilliant, gentle center of their world, and Eleanor, a registered nurse with a pragmatist's heart and a poet's soul, was the one who kept that world turning. She made sure he ate, that the bills were paid, that his genius had a safe harbor from the mundane demands of life. Their daughter, Clara, was their shared masterpiece, a perfect fusion of Richard's inquisitive mind and Eleanor's resilient spirit. Their idyllic, modest life in a quiet Boston suburb shattered on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The call came from the state police. A multi-car pileup on the interstate caused by a sudden, inexplicable brake failure in a commercial truck. Richard, on his way home from a meeting with a potential investor, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was gone instantly. When Clara came home from school that day, A cheerful 10-year-old with a backpack full of spelling tests and crayon drawings, she walked into a house where the light had gone out. The universe had collapsed, leaving Eleanor and Clara adrift in the silent, cold void. In the suffocating fog of grief, Eleanor made a promise to her husband's memory, a silent vow whispered into the darkness of her empty bedroom. She would not let his dream die, and she would not let their daughter's future be another casualty of that roadside tragedy. She packed away her nursing scrubs, her own career, her own identity, becoming a ghost of her former self so that Clara's life could remain vibrant and full. She took a job waiting tables at a high-end bistro in the city, the long hours and aching feet a welcome distraction from the ache in her soul. On weekends, she cleaned houses in the wealthy neighboring towns, her hands, once skilled enough to administer IV drips and comfort the sick, now scrubbing floors and polishing other people's silver. She became a master of budgeting, of stretching every dollar until it screamed. Every penny she earned, every ounce of her energy, was funneled into one singular purpose: Clara. Richard hadn't left much money, but he had left his work. A portfolio of patents and pending applications, his mind immortalized on paper. Over the years, when tuition payments loomed or an unexpected expense arose, Eleanor would make a painful choice. With the guidance of a patent lawyer, she would sell off one of the smaller inventions, a more efficient power converter, a minor software patent. Each sale felt like chipping away a piece of her husband, a small betrayal of his legacy. But she always justified it with the same thought: Richard would have done anything for Clara. Yet, one patent remained untouched, locked away in a safe deposit box. It was his magnum opus, the one he believed would truly change things. A revolutionary design for a solid-state battery that was smaller, safer, and held a charge 10 times longer than anything on the market. This, Eleanor decided, was not for sale. This was Clara's inheritance, her birthright, the key to a future her father had dreamed of for her. Their bond, forged in the crucible of shared loss, became unbreakable. Or so Eleanor believed. They were a team. They did homework together at the small kitchen table, Eleanor quizzing Clara on history dates while her own feet throbbed from a 10-hour shift. She taught Clara how to be strong, to be independent, to believe in herself. She never missed a parent-teacher conference, a school play, or a soccer game. She poured every dream she ever had for herself into her daughter, watching with pride as Clara blossomed into a sharp, ambitious young woman who excelled at university and was accepted into a prestigious business school. Clara was her reason for being, the living, breathing embodiment of her and Richard's love. The sacrifices were not sacrifices, they were simply acts of love, as natural to Eleanor as breathing. Into this tightly knit world of two-stepped Marcus Vance, Richard's younger brother. After the funeral, he had been the image of the dutiful uncle, showing up with solemn promises to always look after them. He was a stark contrast to his brother. Where Richard was a quiet intellectual, Marcus was a salesman, slick, charming, with a quick smile and an answer for everything. He always seemed to be between jobs, pursuing some next big thing that never quite materialized. He doted on Clara, bringing her expensive gifts Eleanor couldn't afford, whispering to her about the great man her father was and the powerful legacy he had left behind. To Eleanor, he offered financial advice, helping her navigate the complexities of Richard's estate. He spoke of protecting the patents with a fierce, almost proprietary tone that Eleanor mistook for family loyalty. He became a fixture, the reliable Uncle Marcus, always there with a supportive word or a helping hand. Eleanor, consumed by the daily grind of survival and focused solely on Clara, never saw the subtle envy in his eyes when he spoke of his brother's genius, nor the avaricious gleam that appeared when he mentioned the untouchable battery patent. She trusted him because he was family. And in Eleanor's world, family was everything. It was a belief she held with absolute conviction, right up until the moment her daughter stood before her and turned that world to ash. Isabel Montgomery did not guide Eleanor through the party. She simply stood beside her, a silent, unmovable presence that acted as a shield against the curious glances and whispered questions. She procured a glass of water for Eleanor, her movements efficient and devoid of pity, offering not hollow comfort, but a quiet, stabilizing strength. An assistant was summoned with a whisper. A car was arranged, and within minutes, Eleanor was being driven away from the glittering facade of her daughter's new life. The sound of the string quartet replaced by the ringing in her own ears. Isabel had taken her number and said only two things. "Go home and rest. I will call you in the morning." The days that followed were a special kind of hell, a purgatory of unanswered calls and unsent messages. Eleanor's text to Clara, at first pleading and confused, then heartbroken, and finally just a desperate, "Please, talk to me," were met with a stark, digital silence. Each one was marked with the single gray checkmark of non-delivery. She had been blocked, erased. With a few taps on a screen, her daughter had severed a lifetime of connection. The rejection was so absolute, so profound, it felt like a second death. Eleanor wandered through her small house, a museum of Clara's childhood, where every framed photo on the wall now felt like a cruel joke, a relic from a life that was apparently a lie. The woman who had faced widowhood with fierce determination was now paralyzed by a grief that was somehow sharper, more personal than losing her husband. Richard was taken from her. Clara had chosen to leave. True to her word, Isabel called. Her voice on the phone was the same as it had been at the party, calm, measured, and serious. She didn't ask how Eleanor was feeling. The question would have been an insult. Instead, she stated a time and a place. The Gotham Lounge at the Peninsula. 3 o'clock on Thursday. It will be quiet. It wasn't a request, but an arrangement. And Eleanor, clinging to the only hand offered to her in the darkness, simply agreed. The lounge was a world of hushed tones, dark wood, and old money. Isabel was already there, seated in a high-backed leather armchair in a discreet corner, a pot of tea on the table between them. She looked just as poised and powerful as she had at her home, a woman accustomed to controlling her environment. As Eleanor sat down, Isabel poured her a cup of tea without asking. "Thank you for coming, Eleanor," she began, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "I will not waste your time with pleasantries. I know you are in pain, but I suspect you are also a woman who values the truth above all else. That is why I ask you here." Eleanor could only nod, her throat tight. "For the past 6 months," Isabel continued, her voice low, "since Leo and Clara became serious, I have been observing. I make it my business to understand the people who enter my family's circle, and I have seen things that concern me." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "I have heard your daughter speak of her father's legacy, not with the pride of a loving child, but with the fervor of a corporate raider. She uses phrases like unlocking its market potential and reclaiming what's rightfully mine. I once overheard her on the phone, assuring someone that she would soon have full legal control and that her mother's sentimental attachments would no longer be an issue." Each word was a small, sharp stone hitting the fragile surface of Eleanor's composure. These were echoes of conversations she had dismissed, strange, businesslike phrases from Clara that had felt alien and out of place, which she had attributed to the influence of her business school education. "And then there is your brother-in-law," Isabel said, her gaze unwavering. "Marcus. He is always there, always at her elbow. At family dinners, when I would ask Clara a question about her future, it was often Marcus who would answer for her. His influence over her seems excessive, unhealthy. He looks at her not as a niece, but as an asset." Eleanor felt a defensive instinct rise within her. "Marcus has always been there for us. He's family." "Is he?" Isabel countered, her tone not argumentative, but probing. "Or has he simply made himself indispensable while slowly isolating Clara from you?" She leaned forward slightly. "This is the part that may be difficult to hear. The reason I am so invested in this is not just because of my son, it's because of your husband." Eleanor stared at her, confused. "You knew Richard?" A flicker of something warm, a genuine memory, softened Isabel's expression for a moment. "A long time ago. We were in the same advanced engineering program at MIT. We were rivals, then friends. We even worked together briefly on a project after graduation, before my path took me into the corporate world and he chose to focus on pure research. I knew his mind, Eleanor. He was brilliant, a visionary. I also know what he was working on when he died. The air left Eleanor's lungs. The battery patent. Exactly, Isabel confirmed. The ST400 solid-state matrix. He showed me the initial theoretical work. It was revolutionary then, and it's worth a fortune now. My own company's R&D department would kill for that technology. So would our competitors. She took a sip of her tea, her eyes locking onto Eleanor's. A few weeks ago, one of my chief competitors, a ruthless corporation called Dynacorp, made a quiet inquiry to one of my board members. They boasted that they were on the verge of acquiring a game-changing piece of battery technology, one that would put them decades ahead of the market. The technology they described was, without a doubt, the work of Richard Vance. The puzzle pieces began to slam into place in Eleanor's mind, forming a picture of such monstrous betrayal that she could barely breathe. Marcus, with his constant talk of protecting Richard's legacy, Clara, with her sudden coldness and corporate jargon. The disinheritance from the wedding wasn't just an act of emotional cruelty, it was a strategic move. It was the final step in cutting her off, clearing the way for them to seize control of the one thing she had protected for 15 years. They have been working together, Eleanor whispered, the realization dawning with sickening clarity. All this time, Marcus has been poisoning my daughter against me, manipulating her. For money? Isabel gave a slow, solemn nod. I believe Clara is a pawn in a game she doesn't fully understand. Marcus has filled her head with lies, convincing her that you are the obstacle to her great destiny. He is using her love for her father and her ambition to orchestrate the theft of your husband's life's work. The wedding, her entry into my family, was meant to be the final seal on their plan, giving their actions a veneer of legitimacy. She reached across the table, her hand resting for a moment on Eleanor's. Her touch was firm, not soft. It was the touch of an ally. He underestimated two things, Eleanor, Isabel said, her voice now laced with steel. He underestimated my memory, and he underestimated you. The words hung in the quiet air of the lounge, more potent than the fragrant steam rising from the teacups. He underestimated you. For the first time in days, the suffocating fog of grief in Eleanor's mind thinned, pierced by a single, sharp ray of light. It wasn't the light of hope, not yet. It was the cold, hard light of anger. A profound, clarifying rage that burned away the tears and confusion. Isabel Montgomery wasn't offering her pity. She was offering her a sword. And in that moment, Eleanor realized she was tired of bleeding. She was ready to fight back. The last vestiges of her skepticism vanished, replaced by a grim certainty. Every strange conversation with Clara, every slick comment from Marcus that had ever rubbed her the wrong way, suddenly snapped into focus. She looked at Isabel, a woman she had met only once before, a stranger from a different world. Yet, in Isabel's steady, discerning gaze, Eleanor saw not a benefactor, but an equal, a fellow protector of Richard's legacy, an ally. "What do you need me to do?" Eleanor's voice was quiet, but the tremor was gone. It was the first time she had spoken with any semblance of her old strength since that night at the party. A small, approving nod was Isabel's only reply. She reached into her leather handbag and produced a sleek, impossibly thin smartphone. She didn't scroll through contacts. She simply spoke a name into the device. "Call Arthur Finch." A moment later, she was speaking, her tone shifting from that of a concerned confidant to a CEO issuing directives. "Arthur, it's Isabel. I have a delicate situation that requires your immediate and absolute discretion. Yes, it's a family matter, but with significant corporate implications. I'm with the client now. Her name is Eleanor Vance. Yes, Richard Vance's widow. That's why I'm calling you. Clear your afternoon. We'll be at your office in an hour." She ended the call and then made another. "Get me Mr. Graves." The name sounded ominous, purposeful. "Graves, Isabel Montgomery. I have a new file for you. 2 subjects. Marcus Vance and his niece, Clara Vance. I want everything. Financials, communications, associations. I suspect financial fraud and undue influence. The goal is asset protection and evidence gathering. I'll have Arthur Finch send over the preliminary authorization. I want you to start with Marcus. I have a feeling he's the kind of man who leaves a messy trail." She put the phone away and looked at Eleanor. "Arthur Finch has been my family's private counsel for 30 years. He is loyal, brilliant, and as discreet as a priest in a confessional. Mr. Graves is less refined, but he is the best at what he does. He finds things that people want to remain hidden. They work for me, and today they work for you. There will be no cost." She raised a hand to cut off Eleanor's impending protest. "Do not argue. Richard was my friend. And no one," she added, her voice dropping to an icy whisper, "no one uses my son and my family's name as cover for a corporate heist. This is my fight now, too." The journey to Arthur Finch's office was a silent one. As the car moved through the bustling streets of Manhattan, Eleanor felt a profound internal shift. The world outside the window looked the same, but her perception of it had been fundamentally altered. She was no longer a victim adrift in a sea of pain. She was a woman with a mission. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in her chest, but it was no longer an anchor holding her down. It was a whetstone upon which her resolve was being sharpened. In Arthur Finch's mahogany-paneled office, high above the city, the plan began to take shape. Arthur was an older man with kind eyes and a mind like a steel trap. He listened intently as Eleanor, prompted by Isabel, recounted her story. He didn't interrupt, but his pen moved silently across a legal pad, capturing every detail. For the first time, Eleanor felt like she was being truly heard. Her experiences validated, not as the ramblings of a heartbroken mother, but as testimony. That night, back in the suffocating silence of her own home, Eleanor's mind, now armed with purpose, began to work. It was as if a dam had broken. Memories, once hazy and dismissed, came flooding back with chilling clarity. She remembered an afternoon 2 years ago. Marcus had shown up in a panic, carrying a stack of documents. He'd said it was to consolidate some of Richard's smaller, dormant patents into a single holding company for tax purposes and to protect them from liabilities. He'd flipped through the pages quickly, pointing to signature lines, his pen hovering. "It's just standard legal boilerplate, Eleanor. The lawyer is waiting on these. We have to move fast." She had been busy, distracted by a leaking pipe in the basement, and she trusted him. She had signed without reading, her hand flowing over the pages, never questioning, never suspecting. Another memory surfaced. A phone call with Clara from about 6 months ago. Eleanor had expressed concern about their dwindling savings. Clara's response had been oddly dismissive, almost condescending. "Mom, you have to stop thinking so small," Clara had said, her voice echoing the confident cadence of a business seminar. "Uncle Marcus says Dad's portfolio is a sleeping giant, and your risk-averse strategy is costing us millions in potential earnings. It's time for a more aggressive approach." At the time, Eleanor had been hurt by the criticism, but proud of what she thought was Clara's burgeoning business acumen. Now, she recognized the words for what they were. Marcus's words, spoken through her daughter's mouth. She sat at her kitchen table, a cup of cold tea in her hands, and the little red flags she had ignored for years began to stitch themselves together into a massive, blood-red banner of betrayal. She remembered Marcus driving a new luxury sedan just weeks after borrowing a substantial sum from her, claiming it was a company car from a new venture. She recalled Clara suddenly losing interest in a summer internship at a non-profit to take a consulting gig arranged by her uncle. It had paid suspiciously well and involved several trips to meet with private equity partners who, Eleanor now suspected, were connected to Dynacorp. The kindness, the support, the family loyalty, it had all been a performance. A long, cruel, meticulously crafted deception. Marcus hadn't been helping her. He had been scouting her, assessing her vulnerabilities, grooming her daughter. He was a predator who had circled their broken family for 15 years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Eleanor stood up and walked to the phone, her movements now crisp and decisive. She picked up the receiver and dialed the private number Isabel had given her. "Isabel, it's Eleanor," she said when the call was answered. "I have something for Mr. Graves. I know where he needs to start looking. I think I signed away control of Richard's holding company 2 years ago, and I think I know the name of the shell corporation Marcus used. Eleanor's tip was the key that unlocked the first door. Armed with the name of the shell corporation, she vaguely remembered Vance Legacy Holdings, LLC, and the approximate date she signed the papers. Mr. Graves went to work. The investigation that followed was a quiet, brutal blitzkrieg, waged not with weapons, but with subpoenas, digital forensic software, and the relentless, methodical tracing of money through the labyrinthine corridors of modern finance. For Eleanor, the results came not as a single, dramatic revelation, but as a steady drip of poison, delivered in the sterile, leather-bound summary reports prepared by Arthur Finch. She and Isabel would meet in Arthur's office, the city skyline, a silent witness behind them, and review the findings. The first report confirmed Eleanor's worst fears. The documents she had signed 2 years prior did indeed create Vance Legacy Holdings. She was listed as the majority owner, but a clause buried deep in the fine print of the operating agreement, a clause Marcus had assured her was standard boilerplate, appointed him as a special managing advisor. This role granted him the authority to negotiate on behalf of the LLC, and most critically, to initiate changes in ownership structure with the consent of the majority holder. The signature of consent he later acquired from Clara was all he needed. Mr. Graves's team dug deeper. They procured the LLC's full filing history from the state of Delaware, a haven for anonymous corporations. A second filing had been made just 8 months ago. It was an amendment to the operating agreement, transferring 100% of the ownership to Clara Vance, citing a gift of inheritance in advance. Eleanor's signature was on the transfer document, a perfect, clean, digital copy. But Graves's forensic team proved it was a forgery. Lifted pixel for pixel from the initial documents she had signed under Marcus's hurried supervision. He hadn't even bothered to get a fresh signature. He had simply copied and pasted her trust from one document to another, using it to legally erase her from her husband's legacy. But the paper trail was only the skeleton of the conspiracy. It was the digital trail that gave it flesh and blood, that exposed its dark, beating heart. Graves's team legally obtained years of deleted emails and text messages exchanged between Marcus and Clara. Reading them was, for Eleanor, an exercise in pure agony. It was like watching a time-lapse film of her daughter's soul being eroded. The early messages, from when Clara was in college, were subtle, almost innocuous. Marcus positioned himself as the cool, understanding uncle, the one who got her ambition. "Your mother is a saint, Clara. But she thinks like a nurse, not a CEO," one email read. "She wants you to be safe. Your father wanted you to be powerful. There's a difference." He planted seeds of resentment, framing Eleanor's careful, sacrifice-fueled financial planning as a weakness. She sold off the X2 power converter patent for pennies, he wrote in another. "It was a fire sale. We can't let her do that with the real prize. We have to be the protectors of your father's vision." As Clara entered business school, the manipulation escalated. Marcus's tone became more urgent, more conspiratorial. He started sending her articles about failed inventors and squandered family fortunes, creating a narrative of impending doom. "Eleanor is too emotional to handle this," a text message declared. "Her grief is a liability. The corporate world will eat her alive, and your inheritance with it. We are the only ones who can see this clearly." He began to feed Clara a steady diet of lies, exaggerating Eleanor's financial struggles, while simultaneously lavishing Clara with money he was siphoning from his own shady dealings. He created a world where Clara was a beleaguered princess and Eleanor was the well-meaning but incompetent regent, and he, Marcus, was the loyal knight who could help her claim her rightful throne. Then came the final, damning phase. The emails from the past year were no longer about manipulation, they were about logistics. They discussed the Dynacorp deal openly. Marcus had been in secret talks with them for 18 months. A preliminary offer of $50 million was on the table. D-Corp is ready to move, Marcus wrote, but they need assurance that the asset is unencumbered. Your mother's involvement is the last hurdle. The transfer of ownership needs to be absolute. The plan was laid bare. get the LLC in Clara's name, secure a buyer, and then use the Montgomery wedding as the perfect cover. Marrying Leo would not only elevate Clara's social standing, but would also provide a plausible explanation for her sudden, immense wealth. Any questions about a $50 million deal would be muted by the sheer power and influence of the Montgomery name. It was a brilliant, ruthless strategy. Sitting in Arthur's quiet office, the city lights beginning to glitter below, Eleanor read the final, chilling exchange Graves had recovered. It was from the week before the engagement party. Clara, she's going to be devastated. Are you sure there's no other way? Marcus, there isn't. Think of it like surgery, kiddo. A sharp, clean cut is kinder in the long run. She'll be upset for a while, but she'll be comfortable. We'll make sure she's taken care of. But she cannot be at that wedding. Her presence would create complications with the Montgomerys and with the buyers. She represents the past. You are the future. Your father would understand. This is your moment. Don't let her sentimentality ruin it for us. Eleanor put the papers down on the polished table, her hands steady. The pain was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was now surrounded by an unnerving calm. The daughter she had loved, the girl she had raised, had been convinced to trade her own mother for a fantasy of power, a lie wrapped in dollar signs. She looked up and met Isabel's gaze across the table. There were no tears in her eyes, only the unwavering resolve of a woman who now knew exactly what she was fighting for. It was no longer just about a patent. It was about reclaiming the truth from the ashes of a devastating betrayal. The ride home from Arthur Finch's office was a blur. Eleanor sat in the back of the town car Isabel had provided, the leather-bound report resting on her lap like a tombstone. It was one thing to suspect a betrayal, to have it laid out for you by a well-meaning stranger. It was another thing entirely to hold the evidence in your own hands, to read the cold, typed-out words of your own child plotting your erasure. The conspiracy was no longer a theory. It was a documented history of her life's great love being turned into a weapon against her. When she stepped inside her house, the silence was different. It was no longer the quiet of an empty nest. It was the profound, suffocating silence of a mausoleum. Every object, every photograph, every memory was now tainted, viewed through the sickening filter of the truth. She looked at the framed photo on the mantelpiece, taken at Clara's university graduation. Clara was beaming, her arm around Eleanor's shoulders. Eleanor remembered the overwhelming pride of that day, the feeling that every sacrifice had been worth it. Now, she could see only a chilling performance. She looked at her daughter's smiling face and saw a co-conspirator. The report from Mr. Graves had noted that the first significant payment from Marcus to Clara's consulting company had occurred just 3 weeks before that photo was taken. Her daughter's joy was funded by the very first steps of the plot to betray her. She walked into the kitchen, the heart of their little family for so many years. She could still see a younger Clara sitting at the table, struggling with her algebra, Eleanor beside her, patiently explaining equations after a 12-hour shift at the hospital. She remembered the nights she had eaten toast for dinner so Clara could have the chicken, the Christmases where she had claimed she didn't need anything so that the gift Clara wanted would be under the tree. These memories, once a source of warmth and validation, now rose up like ghosts to mock her. They weren't cherished moments of a shared life. They were transactions in a one-sided relationship she had been too blind to see. Her love had been taken, consumed, and ultimately deemed an obstacle to be removed. The full weight of Marcus's cruelty settled upon her. He hadn't just stolen from her. He had systematically dismantled her daughter's heart and rebuilt it in his own greedy image. He had taken Clara's ambition and twisted it into avarice. He had taken her love for her father and warped it into a weapon against her mother. He had hollowed out her child, leaving behind a beautiful, polished shell, and Eleanor, in her all-consuming love, had never noticed the change. The grief she felt now was for two people: the husband she had lost to a tragic accident, and the daughter she had lost to a slow, deliberate poisoning of the soul. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy. It was an anger unlike any she had ever known. It wasn't the hot, fleeting anger of an argument. It was a cold, dense, and terrifyingly clear fury. It was the anger of a gentle creature, that has been cornered and prodded one too many times. In that moment, the heartbroken, weeping mother who had crumbled at the engagement party ceased to exist. In her place, something new began to form, forged in the crucible of her pain. It was a woman made of iron and resolve, a woman who had lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. Her phone buzzed, startling her out of her reverie. It was Isabel. "Eleanor?" Isabel's voice was calm, but it held an edge of urgency. "Arthur told me you've taken the full report home. I want you to listen to me very carefully. What you are feeling right now is a righteous anger. Do not suppress it, but do not act on it either." "He turned her into a monster," Eleanor said, her own voice sounding foreign to her ears, stripped of all warmth. "He used my love, our love for Richard, and he turned it into this ugly thing." "Yes, he did," Isabel agreed, without a trace of placating sympathy. "Men like Marcus Vance are parasites. They feed on goodness and trust, but they have a weakness, their arrogance. They believe you are exactly what they have told Clara you are, a sentimental, weak-willed woman who will break under pressure. They are expecting tears, or perhaps a hysterical phone call. They are not expecting a strategist." Eleanor was silent, the word hanging in the air. Strategist. "Anger is a powerful fuel, Eleanor," Isabel continued, her voice like a steady hand on her shoulder. "But it is a poor navigator. We cannot let them see you are angry. We cannot let them know that we see them. We have the truth on our side, and we have the element of surprise. We will not give them the satisfaction of seeing you break. We will give them the shock of seeing you rise. We will not play their game. We will burn their game to the ground, and we will do it on our terms." Isabel's words cut through the rage, giving it shape and purpose. She was right. A screaming match would accomplish nothing. A confrontation born of raw pain would only confirm their narrative of her as an emotional, unstable woman. Justice required a colder, more calculated approach. It required a performance. It required a plan. After the call, Eleanor walked into her bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. The face that stared back was pale and etched with grief, but the eyes were different. The soft, forgiving warmth was gone, replaced by a hard, clear focus. She had mourned the loss of her daughter's love. Now, it was time to address the crime that had been committed against her, against Richard's memory, against the very idea of family. She was no longer just a victim of a terrible betrayal. She was the sole executor of a long overdue justice, and she would deliver it with the quiet, unyielding force of a woman who had finally, truly, understood the depths of her own strength. They had wanted to erase her. They had no idea they were about to create their own reckoning. The war room was Arthur Finch's conference room, a soundproofed sanctuary of leather and polished wood, 40 stories above the New York City streets. The evidence, once a scattered collection of painful discoveries, was now organized into a thick, damning dossier on the table. The question was no longer what had happened, but what to do about it. Eleanor, poised and silent, sat beside Isabel, the two women a study in contrasting, yet complementary, forms of power. "A lawsuit would be quiet and lengthy," Arthur began, his tone cautious. "Marcus would drown us in motions and delays. By the time it went to court, he could have already sold the patent and moved the money to an untraceable offshore account. A criminal complaint would alert them, giving them time to destroy evidence and coordinate their stories. In my legal opinion, a conventional approach is a losing one." "I agree," Isabel said, her fingers steepled. "This isn't a crime that can be undone quietly. This was a public betrayal in the making, and it requires a public correction. We cannot give them the dignity of a private fight. They chose the stage when they chose to use my family as their cover." Her gaze shifted to the wedding invitations stacked on a corner of the table. "They have provided us with the perfect venue." Eleanor looked up. "The wedding?" "No," Isabel corrected, a glint in her eye. "The wedding would be a circus, too many innocent guests, too much chaos. It would become a spectacle, and the truth would be lost in the noise. I'm thinking of something more intimate, more precise." She tapped a finger on the calendar. "The rehearsal dinner, the night before the wedding. It's a smaller, more controlled environment. The guests will be the inner circle, both families, the closest friends, the key players. It's a room full of people whose opinions they genuinely care about. It is the ideal theater for the truth to make its debut. A cold understanding dawned on Eleanor. It was a terrifyingly bold plan. It was also perfect. The weeks leading up to the dinner were a blur of meticulous preparation. Under Arthur's guidance, they began to assemble their weapon. It wasn't a weapon of steel, but of information, crafted to be irrefutable and psychologically devastating. They took the dry data from Mr. Graves's investigation, the bank statements, the LLC filings, the forged documents, and wove it into a narrative. Isabel, with her decades of experience in corporate presentations, was ruthless in its construction. "We need to tell a story," she instructed, pacing the room. "We start with the hero, Richard Vance, the brilliant inventor. We establish the legacy. Then, we introduce the devoted guardian of that legacy, you, Eleanor. We show the sacrifices. Only then, when the audience is completely invested, do we introduce the villains." The climax of their presentation came from an unexpected final report from Mr. Graves. Posing as a foreign investor interested in one of Marcus's other dubious ventures, Graves had secured a meeting. The meeting was recorded. In the audio file, Marcus, arrogant and flush with the prospect of another payday, couldn't help but brag. The sound of his voice filled the conference room, slick with self-satisfaction. "The big one is the Vance patent," he boasted over the clink of whiskey glasses. "My brother's masterpiece. Took me years to pry it loose from my sister-in-law. Sweet woman, but sentimental. No head for business. Her daughter, Clara, she gets it. She's smart, a real shark, like her uncle. We're closing the deal the week after the wedding. 50 million. And with the Montgomery name behind her, nobody will bat an eye." The recording was the final, unassailable nail in his coffin. While Arthur and Eleanor refined the narrative, Isabel handled the production. She informed the hotel's event coordinator that the Montgomery family was preparing a surprise tribute video for the happy couple, a common and welcome addition to such events. This gave her the perfect excuse to bring in her own A divided by V team, her own large format screen, and her own sound system, all of which she could control completely. She also quietly replaced the hotel's standard security detail for the evening with her own private team, discreet professionals who knew exactly who Marcus Vance was and were prepared for any outcome. As the day drew closer, a new complication arose. Leo. He was no fool. He could feel the growing distance from Clara, could see the predatory greed in Marcus's eyes. He confronted his mother in her study one evening, his face a mask of frustration and concern. "Something is wrong, Mother. Clara is different. She's secretive. And that uncle of hers is like a vulture. What is going on?" Isabel looked at her son, her expression softening for a moment. She chose her words carefully. "Leo, your instincts are serving you well. There are things in motion that you do not understand yet. I cannot tell you everything, not now. But I am asking for your trust, the deepest trust you have ever given me. At the rehearsal dinner, I need you to do nothing but watch and listen. Do not defend anyone, do not interfere. Just watch, and you will have your answers. Can you do that for me?" Leo, though confused and troubled, saw the absolute conviction in his mother's eyes and agreed. The most difficult role in this elaborate production fell to Eleanor. She had to become the woman Marcus and Clara believed her to be. Broken, defeated, and helpless. She let calls from concerned relatives go to voicemail. When forced to reply to an email, her words were vague and listless. The performance reached its zenith when Clara, likely prompted by a nervous Marcus, made a final call to her a few days before the dinner. Eleanor let the phone ring 4 times before answering, her voice deliberately weak and tearful. She pleaded softly with Clara to reconsider, to just talk to her. "I don't understand what I did wrong," she whispered, a line that felt like swallowing glass. "It's not about you, Mom," Clara's voice came back, strained but firm, reciting a line she had clearly rehearsed. "It's about my future. Please, just don't make this harder than it already is." When Eleanor hung up the phone, Her hands were not trembling, her eyes were dry. The actress had played her part. Now, she was ready for the curtain to rise. The stage was set, the script was written, and the players were all moving toward their appointed places, completely unaware that the play they thought they were starring in was about to be interrupted by a far more gripping drama, one in which they had been cast as the fools. The evening of the rehearsal dinner descended upon New York City with a cool, autumnal crispness. The venue was the Ethelgard Room, a private dining hall within a storied hotel off Fifth Avenue, a name synonymous with old-world luxury and discretion. The room was a masterpiece of understated opulence. Tables were draped in heavy ivory linen, set with gleaming silver and crystal that refracted the soft, golden light from a dozen chandeliers. Towering arrangements of white orchids and hydrangeas scented the air, their pristine beauty a perfect, unwitting accomplice to the evening's charade. On the surface, it was the picture of celebration. Laughter and the gentle clinking of champagne flutes filled the room as the 40 or so guests mingled. Clara Vance was the radiant center of it all, a vision in a silk dress, the color of pale champagne. She moved through the room with a practiced grace, her hand resting possessively on the arm of her handsome fiancé, Leo Montgomery. She smiled, she laughed, she accepted the effusive compliments of friends and family, but Leo, watching her closely as his mother had instructed, could see the faint, almost imperceptible tension in her jaw, the way her eyes darted towards the entrance every few minutes. Marcus Vance was in his element, holding court near the bar, dressed in a tailored suit that was just a little too sharp, a little too eager to impress. He exuded an air of triumphant, greasy satisfaction. He was the cat that had not only gotten the cream, but had also secured a lifetime supply. He clapped Leo's father on the back, shared a joke with a Montgomery cousin, and generally behaved like a man who had already won. He looked across the room at his niece, the key to his fortune, and gave her a subtle, confident nod. The plan had worked. They were untouchable. Then, the ornate double doors of the Ethelgard Room opened, and a hush fell over the conversations nearest the entrance. It wasn't a dramatic, crashing silence, but a slow, spreading stillness, like ripples in a pond. Eleanor Vance stood in the doorway. She was not the defeated, grief-stricken woman they had imagined. There were no tear-streaked cheeks, no trembling hands. On Isabel's advice, she had dressed not for a battle, but for a victory. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored sheath dress in a deep sapphire blue that brought out the startling clarity of her eyes. Her hair was styled, her makeup understated, and she carried a quiet, unshakable poise that was more unnerving than any outburst could have ever been. She did not look like an intruder. She looked like she belonged. Clara's face went white with shock and fury. She immediately detached herself from Leo and strode towards the entrance, Marcus right at her heels. "What are you doing here?" Clara hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "I told you." "You can't be here," Marcus interrupted, his voice a menacing purr, already motioning for a hotel staff member. "This is a private event." Eleanor looked past them, her gaze calm and steady. She did not raise her voice. She did not plead. She simply looked her daughter in the eye and said, with a quiet finality that stopped them both cold, "I am still your mother, Clara. I have a right to give you my blessing before you get married." Her serenity was a weapon they hadn't anticipated. To make a scene now, to have her forcibly removed, would be a public relations disaster. It would make them look cruel, monstrous, in front of the very people they were so desperate to impress. Checkmated, Clara and Marcus could do nothing but step aside, their faces masks of barely controlled rage, as Eleanor swept past them and into the room. Isabel, with a quiet word to the maitre d', had a place setting seamlessly added to a table near the back, a perfect vantage point from which Eleanor could observe the entire room. The dinner began, but the atmosphere had shifted. The light-hearted chatter felt forced, the laughter a little too loud. Eleanor sat with a perfect posture, a glass of water untouched before her. She didn't eat. She simply watched. Her presence was a silent, powerful indictment that settled over the room like a fine dust. Clara couldn't stop looking at her, her perfectly constructed composure beginning to crack at the edges. Marcus alternated between glaring at Eleanor and whispering agitatedly to his niece. What was her game? Why wasn't she crying? Why wasn't she making a scene? The calm was more terrifying than any fight. The traditional toasts began, a parade of well wishes and recycled anecdotes. Leo's best man told a humorous story from their college days. The maid of honor, one of Clara's friends from business school, spoke glowingly of Clara's drive and ambition, causing a bitter smile to touch Eleanor's lips. Each toast, each round of polite applause, was another tick of the clock, another step towards the precipice. Through it all, Eleanor remained a statue of maternal grace and silent judgment. She was a ghost at the feast, a specter of the truth in a room built on lies. She felt the nervous glances from Clara, the hateful stares from Marcus, the confused and searching looks from Leo. They were all caught in her gravitational pull, their unease growing with every passing moment of her unnerving, patient silence. They thought her presence was the mystery. They had no idea it was merely the overture. The main performance, the one that would bring the entire gilded stage crashing down, was only moments away from beginning. As the maid of honor's toast concluded with a final, tearful, to Clara and Leo, a wave of polite applause rippled through the Aethelgard room. The formal part of the evening seemed to be over. The waitstaff began to move quietly, preparing to clear the plates. Marcus Vance leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile on his face, and raised his glass in a silent toast to his niece. It was done. They had weathered the storm of Eleanor's arrival, and now the evening would dissolve into casual conversation and celebration. He was already mentally spending his first million. It was in that moment of supreme arrogance that Isabel Montgomery rose from her seat. She moved with an unhurried grace to the small podium at the front of the room, a place that had been set up for the toasts. She picked up the microphone, and the remaining chatter in the room instantly died down. When Isabel Montgomery chose to speak, people listened. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm and resonant, filling the room with an easy authority. "On behalf of the Montgomery family, I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate the union of my son, Leo, and his beautiful fiancée, Clara. A marriage is not just a contract between two people. It is the merging of two families, two histories, and two legacies. It is a structure built on the foundations of trust, honesty, and integrity. Without those things, even the most beautiful facade will eventually crumble." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Marcus, and then on Clara. Legacy is a powerful word. We all want to honor the legacies of those who came before us. But honoring a legacy isn't just about protecting assets. It's about protecting the principles, the character, of the person who built it. A knot of dread began to tighten in Clara's stomach. This was not a normal speech. "Tonight," Isabel continued, "we have been celebrating the future. But before we do, I believe it's vital to have a clear and honest understanding of the past. There is one person in this room who understands the legacy at the heart of this new union better than anyone, and she has prepared a special presentation to share with all of us to truly honor the memory of a great man." Isabel smiled, a cool, unwavering expression. "And so, I would like to invite a very special person, Richard Vance's widow and Clara's mother, Eleanor, to the stage." A collective, audible gasp went through the room. It was a shocking breach of protocol, a moment of high social drama. All eyes swiveled to the back table where Eleanor sat, and then to the head table where Clara's face had become a ghostly mask of disbelief and terror. Marcus half rose from his chair, a protest forming on his lips, but he was met with the icy, unyielding stare of Isabel Montgomery, and he sank back down, his face turning a blotchy red. Slowly, gracefully, Eleanor stood up and made her way to the front of the room. The only sound was the soft rustle of her dress and the frantic, panicked beating of Clara's heart. Eleanor took the microphone from Isabel, her hand perfectly steady. She turned not to the audience, but to the A divided by V technician standing discreetly in the corner, the one Isabel had hired. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The chandeliers in the room dimmed, and the large white screen behind the podium which everyone had assumed was for a slideshow of baby pictures, flickered to life. The first image that appeared was a photograph of a young, smiling Richard Vance, his arm around a college-aged Eleanor, both of them vibrant and full of life. "Good evening." Eleanor's voice was clear and steady, devoid of the emotion the crowd might have expected. It was the voice of a lecturer, a presenter of facts. "My name is Eleanor Vance. Many of you know me as Clara's mother. Tonight, I am here as the widow of Richard Vance and the guardian of his legacy. A legacy that, for the past 15 years, I have protected with my life, and a legacy that has been the subject of a methodical, cruel, and deeply greedy conspiracy." Whispers erupted around the room. The image on the screen changed. It was a legal document, the filing for Vance Legacy Holdings, LLC. Next to it, the second filing, the one transferring ownership to Clara. A third pane appeared, showing Eleanor's two signatures side by side, with a bright red circle around the second one. Text appeared below. "Forensic analysis confirms Signature B is a digital forgery of Signature A." For 2 years, Eleanor continued, her voice never wavering, "I have been the victim of a calculated fraud, orchestrated by my brother-in-law, Marcus Vance, with the full complicity of my daughter Clara." The screen changed again, displaying a series of emails between Marcus and Clara. The font was large enough for everyone to read. "Your mother is a saint, Clara, but she thinks like a nurse, not a CEO. We have to protect your father's legacy from her." Clara let out a small, strangled sob. The guests were no longer whispering. They were staring, open-mouthed, their forks forgotten on their plates. Eleanor was relentless. The next slide showed a simplified financial flowchart, tracing a $5 million consulting fee from an offshore account owned by Dynacorp into the LLC account, now solely controlled by Clara. The price for selling Richard Vance's life's work, a legacy they claimed to be protecting, was $50 million. This was their down payment. Leo stared at the screen, then at the woman beside him, his fiancé, who was now visibly trembling, her face buried in her hands. The puzzle was complete. The coldness, the secrets, the uncle who was always whispering in her ear, it all made a horrifying kind of sense. Marcus was trying to stand, to shout, to call it all lies, but he was flanked by two large, impassive men in dark suits, Isabel's security, who had moved silently to his table. They placed a firm hand on his shoulder, and he stayed seated, his face a grotesque mixture of sweat and fury. Eleanor clicked the remote in her hand one last time. "The evidence I have presented is, I believe, conclusive," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "But I understand that it can be hard to believe that a man could be so treacherous that he could manipulate his own niece into betraying her mother. So perhaps it is best to let the architect of this plan speak for himself." She nodded to the technician. A profound silence fell over the room. And then, from the high-fidelity speakers, came the sound of ice clinking in a glass and the unmistakable, smug voice of Marcus Vance. "The big one is the Vance patent. My brother's masterpiece. Took me years to pry it loose from my sister-in-law. Sweet woman, but sentimental. No head for business. Her daughter, Clara, she gets it. She's smart. A real shark, like her uncle. We're closing the deal the week after the wedding. 50 million. And with the Montgomery name behind her, nobody will bat an eye." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating void in which the full, horrifying weight of the truth descended upon every person in the room. In that silence, reputations died, a future evaporated, and a family shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Eleanor stood at the podium, a solitary figure of justice, looking out at the devastation she had wrought, her expression not of triumph, but of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. For a long, suspended moment after the recording ended, the silence in the Aethelgard room was so absolute it felt physical, pressing in on the eardrums. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of lies, the weight of revelation, and the collective, horrified understanding of 40 different people. Every eye was fixed on the head table, where Clara and Marcus Vance were frozen, pinned in the spotlight of their own treachery. The silence was finally shattered, not by a shout, but by a single, wrenching sob that was torn from Clara's throat. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world imploding. Her face, which had been a mask of pale terror, crumpled completely. The ambition, the arrogance, the cool resolve Marcus had so carefully nurtured in her, all of it dissolved in an instant, revealing the terrified, lost young woman underneath. She turned to look at Marcus, her eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror, as if seeing him for the first time. It wasn't a look of shared panic. It was the look of a dupe staring at her con man. "What did you do?" she whispered, the words barely audible, choked with the ashes of her future. Marcus, jolted into action by her collapse, lurched to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the polished floor. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes wild and darting, seeking an exit, an ally, anything. He found only a sea of cold, accusing stares. "Lies," he bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. He pointed a trembling finger at Eleanor, who still stood at the podium, a statue of quiet composure. "It's all lies. She's a bitter, unstable woman. She's twisting things. She's insane." His blustering was pathetic, the desperate flailing of a man already drowned. Nobody believed him. His own voice, smug and damning, still echoed in their memories. As he took a step forward, two of Isabel's security men moved to intercept him. They didn't touch him, not yet. They simply stood, two impassive mountains of muscle and tailored suits, blocking his path. Their presence was a clear, unspoken message. There is no escape. Then, another figure rose from the head table. Leo Montgomery stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't look at his parents, or the guests, or the pathetic figure of Marcus. He looked only at Clara. She saw him rise, and her sobbing quieted for a moment, a flicker of desperate, impossible hope in her eyes. Perhaps he would defend her, save her. Leo's face was a mask of cold, profound disillusionment. The warmth and affection he once held for her had been scoured away, leaving behind nothing but a chilling disgust. "From the moment my mother asked for my trust," he said, his voice low but carrying with perfect clarity through the silent room, "I prayed that she was wrong, that this was all some terrible misunderstanding." He shook his head, a gesture of finality. "But to sit here and see what you have done, to hear what you have become." He looked away from her, towards the guests, and then at Eleanor. "The wedding is off. I will not, and cannot, marry someone who would do this to their own mother." His words were a gavel, delivering the final verdict. The social execution was complete. Leo's father, a stoic and respected figure in the financial world, stood beside his son. He looked directly at Eleanor, his expression one of deep, genuine regret. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice booming with authority, "on behalf of the entire Montgomery family, I want to offer our sincerest apologies. We are appalled that you and your husband's legacy were subjected to this violation. We were blind, and for that, we are truly sorry." That was the final signal. The spell of horrified silence broke, and the room dissolved into a quiet, orderly chaos. There was no shouting, no overt drama. There was something far more brutal: the soft, rustling sound of a reputation dying. Guests began to murmur to one another, their faces a mixture of pity for Eleanor and contempt for her daughter. They averted their eyes from the head table as if it were a contagion. They began gathering their purses and coats, a quiet, unanimous exodus from the scene of a social crime. As Marcus began to protest again, the two security men finally moved, each taking one of his arms in a firm, non-negotiable grip. Arthur Finch stepped forward, intercepting them on their path to the door, and served a stunned Marcus with a thick legal envelope. "Mr. Vance," Arthur said calmly, "you've been served. That's a temporary injunction freezing all assets of Vance Legacy Holdings, pending a full investigation into criminal fraud." Marcus stared at the papers, his face collapsing as the reality of his ruin total and absolute crashed down upon him. He was escorted from the room, not as a guest, but as a prisoner in a well-tailored suit. Clara was now utterly alone, a solitary figure amidst the wreckage of the head table. She looked up, her tear-streaked face a desperate plea for what? Forgiveness? An explanation? An escape? Her eyes searched the room and finally landed on the one person who had been the source of it all. She looked at her mother. Eleanor was no longer at the podium. She was standing halfway to the door, with Isabel at her side. She met her daughter's gaze from across the room. There was no anger in Eleanor's eyes. There was no triumph, no satisfaction. There was only a vast, bottomless chasm of sorrow. It was the look of a mother gazing upon the ghost of a child she had lost long ago. She held her daughter's gaze for a long, silent moment, and in that look, Clara finally understood the true cost of what she had done. It wasn't just the money or the marriage she had lost. It was the one unconditional love she had ever known, a love she had willingly traded away for a lie. Eleanor gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head, then turned and walked out of the room, leaving her daughter to drown in the silence, utterly and completely alone. The storm of the rehearsal dinner did not end with a thunderclap, but faded into a series of quiet yet seismic aftershocks that permanently altered the landscape of several lives. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Vance family's public reckoning became a hushed and cautionary tale whispered in the exclusive clubs and boardrooms of New York and Connecticut. Marcus Vance, stripped of his assets and facing a mountain of fraud charges, vanished from the social scene, his name becoming synonymous with disgrace. Clara, having lost her fiancé, her reputation, and her family in a single, self-inflicted cataclysm, retreated into a deep, impenetrable silence, leaving the Montgomery estate and disappearing from public view. For Eleanor, these weeks were a strange and surreal period of deconstruction and rebuilding. With the swift, merciless efficiency of Arthur Finch's legal team, control of Vance Legacy Holdings and all its assets was fully restored to her. The legal documents she signed now were not instruments of deception, but of reclamation. She walked through her house, the same rooms that had recently felt like a tomb, and began the slow process of healing. She didn't remove the photos of Clara. Instead, she looked at them with a new, painful clarity, mourning the daughter she had raised while trying to understand the stranger she had become. The victory did not feel triumphant. It felt heavy, like an object of great value that had been recovered from the bottom of a deep, dark ocean, still dripping with the cold and the loss. One crisp afternoon, a month after the dinner, Isabel Montgomery came to visit. She arrived not in a chauffeured town car, but driving herself, and she brought not flowers or condolences, but a thick, blue binder. They sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, the same table where Clara had once done her homework, and Isabel opened the binder. "This is a proposal, Eleanor," she said, her tone direct but respectful, "from the board of Montgomery Tech. We have had our top engineers review the abstract of Richard's ST-400 patent. To be blunt, it's the holy grail we've all been searching for. It's a decade ahead of anything we have." She pushed the binder across the table. "We don't want to buy it from you. We want to partner with you. We propose the creation of a new, independent research division within our company. It will be called the Richard Vance Laboratories for Energy Innovation. You would sit on the board as a founding director, with full oversight and a controlling interest in the division's ethics committee, ensuring Richard's work is never used in a way he wouldn't approve of. We will provide the funding, the facilities, and the finest scientific minds in the country. Together, we can see his dream through to completion, honorably and transparently." Eleanor stared at the proposal, at her late husband's name printed in elegant, serious font on the cover. For 15 years, the patent had been a symbol of her past, a sacred relic she had to protect. Isabel was offering to turn it into a symbol of her future. It was a purpose, a new chapter she had never dared to imagine. It was a chance not just to guard Richard's legacy, but to bring it to life. For the first time in a very long time, she felt a flicker, not of sorrow or anger, but of genuine, unburdened hope. Later that week, another ghost from her past arrived, this one delivered by the mailman. It was a simple, cream-colored envelope, addressed in Clara's familiar, elegant handwriting. Eleanor's hand trembled as she held it. She left it on the entryway table for 2 full days, a silent, potent object radiating a complex mix of pain and memory. Finally, late one night, she sat down with a cup of tea and slid it open with a kitchen knife. The letter was 4 pages long, every line filled with the raw, disjointed anguish of a soul that had been shattered. It was not a letter of excuses, but of confession. "Mom," it began, the simple word looking alien on the page. "I am writing this from a small, rented room that feels like the other side of the moon. There is no excuse for what I have done. There is no apology that could ever be enough. I just wanted you to know the truth of my own weakness, my own monumental foolishness. For years, Uncle Marcus told me stories. He made Dad into a legend and made me believe I was the sole heir to a kingdom. He told me you were too soft, too sentimental to protect it. He said your love for Dad made you blind to the harsh realities of the world. He twisted my ambition into a weapon and aimed it at you. He made me believe that betraying you was the only way to honor Dad. I see now, with a clarity that is physically painful, that he didn't want me to honor Dad. He wanted me to honor his greed. I sat at that dinner, wearing a dress that was bought with the down payment for selling Dad's soul, and when I saw you walk in, I felt a flicker of the truth. But I was too weak, too far gone. I have lost everything. The money, the name, the man I thought I loved. But that is all nothing. The truth is, I destroyed the only real and good thing in my life for a future that was never real. I destroyed you. I destroyed us." The last lines were stained with what looked like a teardrop. "I don't ask for your forgiveness. I know it is an impossible thing to ask. I will live with what I have done for the rest of my life. I just needed to say it, to confess it to the one person I wronged the most. I am so sorry." Eleanor folded the letter with meticulous care. The words offered an explanation, but they didn't offer a cure. Justice had been served upon Marcus, and fate had served a harsh, swift justice upon Clara. But the wound in Eleanor's own heart remained. She thought about the word forgiveness. It was a simple word for a concept so complex it could take a lifetime to understand. Could she ever separate the daughter she had raised from the woman who had knowingly conspired to ruin her? Could a bridge be rebuilt across a canyon of such profound betrayal? She walked to her living room window and looked out into the quiet, dark street. In one hand, she held the proposal from Isabel, a tangible, promising future. In the other, she held the letter from Clara, a fragile, uncertain past. She had won the war, reclaimed the legacy, and found a new purpose. But as she stood there, caught between the dawn of a new life and the ghost of the old one, she knew with a sad, weary certainty that the cost of victory had been her family, and that some wounds, no matter how justly acquired, may never truly heal. The seasons turned, pulling the vivid, painful colors of autumn into the stark, quiet monochrome of winter. 3 months after the night that had upended her world, Eleanor Vance was living in the fragile beginnings of a new reality. She had accepted Isabel Montgomery's offer. Her weeks were now a strange landscape of board meetings, lab tours, and financial projections. She was learning a new language, one of intellectual property and market phases, and in the focused, collaborative work of bringing Richard's vision to life, she found a sense of purpose that was slowly, carefully, papering over the cracks in her soul. The Richard Vance Laboratories were officially under construction, a testament in brick and steel that a legacy, once stolen, could be reclaimed and made to flourish. Clara's letter remained in a box in her bedside table. It was neither answered nor thrown away. It simply existed, a quiet, unresolved chord in the otherwise forward-moving symphony of her new life. Forgiveness remained a distant, theoretical shore, and she was not yet ready to attempt the voyage. It was on a cold, gray Saturday that she finally decided to face the last ghost, the attic. It had been a sealed time capsule for 15 years, a place of dust and memory she hadn't had the strength to confront. Now, with a new, hard-won fortitude, she felt ready to sort through the past, to finally put it in order. Surrounded by boxes of Clara's childhood drawings and Richard's old college textbooks, she came across a heavy, sealed footlocker, labeled simply, "Richard, Personal." She pried open the lid, a scent of old paper and fading cologne rising to meet her. A scent that was so purely Richard, it made her heart ache. Inside, beneath stacks of his technical notebooks filled with familiar equations, were things she hadn't seen in years. Photographs, letters he'd written to her while they were dating, his favorite worn-out university sweatshirt. At the very bottom, tucked into a false floor she never knew existed, was a slim, leather-bound journal. It wasn't for work. This was different from his other notebooks. Curious, she took it downstairs, and with a cup of tea warming her hands, she began to read. His familiar, slightly slanted handwriting filled the pages with his voice. He wrote of his breakthroughs with the battery, his frustrations with investors, his immense, boundless love for her and their daughter. It was a painful, beautiful journey back in time. But as she moved into the entries from the final year of his life, the tone began to change. A shadow crept into the pages, and its name was Marcus. June 12th, one entry read, "Marcus came by again today. He lost big on a stock tip and needed another loan. I had to say no. The desperation in his eyes is starting to worry me. He keeps asking about the ST400's valuation, not with curiosity, but with a kind of hunger." A few weeks later, July 3rd, had a row with Marcus. "He thinks I should sell the patent now. Take the quick payout." I tried to explain that it's not ready, that the work is what matters. He called me a fool, said I was sitting on a winning lottery ticket and letting it expire. He looks at my life's work and all he sees are dollar signs. Eleanor's blood began to run cold. She read on, her fingers gripping the pages, as Richard's entries chronicled his growing fear and distrust of his own brother. He wrote of Marcus's gambling debts, his shady business partners, his unsettling obsession with the idea of a fast, massive payday. Then, she turned to the final page, to the last entry he ever wrote, dated just 2 days before the accident. The handwriting was rushed, agitated. The words leaped off the page and pierced her straight through the heart. October 21st. Marcus was here while I was in the garage. He was asking about the car's brakes again, saying he'd heard a noise the last time I gave him a ride. It felt strange. He knows nothing about cars. I have a terrible feeling he did something. It's a paranoid thought, but I can't shake it. If anything happens to me, tell Eleanor to look into him." The teacup slipped from her numb fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound was distant, unreal. Eleanor stared at the page, at her husband's final, desperate warning from beyond the grave. The police report had flickered through her mind. A multi-car pileup, caused by a sudden, inexplicable brake failure in a commercial truck. That had been the official story. The random, meaningless tragedy. But what if it wasn't the truck's brakes that had failed? What if Richard had tried to swerve, to stop, and had found his own brakes unresponsive? What if Marcus had simply ensured that no matter what happened on that highway, Richard would have no escape? The betrayal was not a structure built over 15 years. It was a seed planted in a single, monstrous act of violent greed. The plan wasn't just to steal a patent, it was to steal a life. The theft, the manipulation, Clara's corruption, it was all just the long, patient fallout of a murder. The justice she had served at that lavish dinner now felt like a child's game. She had exposed a thief, but the killer had remained hidden in plain sight, masquerading for years as a loving uncle. She stood up, the journal clutched in her hand. The grief, the sorrow, the conflict over forgiveness, it all evaporated, burned away by a new, absolute certainty. Her fight was not over. It had just begun. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much, for in their quiet resolve, they are not plotting revenge, but preparing to serve a justice that has been long overdue. The story of the Vance family is a testament to the fact that the most bitter wars are often fought within the walls we call home. Join us next time as we explore another tale hidden behind the closed doors of family secrets.